And on to debate number 2. Viewers, 34-year-old Zohran Mamdani has won the New York City mayoral election, which makes him the first Muslim mayor of the biggest city of the United States, seen as Trump's biggest political foe now. Mamdani, in his victory speech and in this moment of, has said that in this moment of political darkness, New York will be the light. He has defeated former governor Andrew Cuomo and Republican Curtis Silva. Now, after the results in an election that was considered a referendum on him and Republicans, Donald Trump has tried to dismiss the bad news by giving reasons. He gave 2 reasons why the Republicans lost these elections. Reason 1, Trump wasn't on the ballot, and reason 2, the ongoing U.S. shutdown. In his victory speech, Mamdani, who once described himself as Trump's worst nightmare, reminded Trump that the city that gave rise to him could also defeat him. He had 4 words for Trump. Listen in.
After all, if anyone can show a nation betrayed by Donald Trump how to defeat him, it is the city that gave rise to him. And if there is any way to terrify a despot, it is by dismantling the very conditions that allowed him to accumulate power. This is not only how we stop Trump, it's how we stop the next one. So Donald Trump, since I know you're watching, words for you. Turn the volume up. And we will build a city hall that stands steadfast alongside Jewish New Yorkers, where the more than 1 million Muslims know that they belong. Not just in the 5 boroughs of this city, but in the halls of power. No more will New York be a city where you can traffic in Islamophobia and
You're watching the News Hour at 10, debate number 2 on Times Now, Super Prime Time.
All right, joining us on the show now is Alex Zoran, Republican strategist, and he's a former U.S. Senate candidate. We also have with us Brad Bannon. He's a host of Deadline DC with Brad Bannon and a podcast CEO of Bannon Communications Research. Thank you so much. Of course, Tushar Gupta continues with us from New Delhi as well. Alex, how much of a setback is this really for the Republicans? Of course, we've seen the kind of very sharp-pitched rhetoric throughout the campaign. And is this in some ways a setback for President Trump and Republicans?
Well, New York City has not had a Republican mayor since Mike Bloomberg left. So this election in New York City was about the left versus the far left, and the far left won. Obviously, Zohran Mamdani won election against a scandal-plagued, disgraced former governor of New York who barely spent any time in New York City. His win galvanized the media, took the city by surprise, took the country by surprise, and should be viewed in that light. Do you know who really talked more about Trump on the campaign trail in the New York City mayor's race? It was Andrew Cuomo, and he lost. This race in New York City was about 2 things. It was about affordability, which redounded to Mamdani's strengths, and it was also about the mostly media-created narrative of his star power, and that's what he was able to use to run this idea, this broken ideology that has people in New York City actually voting against their own interests and the interests of people further down the economic ladder. The upper middle class and the rich have voted for someone who is going to take away money from the struggling middle class, and it's very sad to see.
All right. Let me bring in Brad Bannon on this. Brad Bannon, we've seen the kind of campaign. Very clearly, Mamdani has tried to, target the working class. He tried to target the immigrants as well. But somewhere or the other, why is it that we are seeing senior Democratic leaders, failing to either endorse him or, come in with Mamdani? Because this is the kind of vote base that one would have imagined typically supports the Democrat Party.
Well, I think Americans may be divided politically, but they're united in their disapproval of Donald Trump. Everywhere across America last night, where we had an election in New York City, California, New Jersey, Virginia, Georgia, and Pennsylvania, the Americans who voted were united in their contempt for Donald Trump. His presidential job rating was underwater in each of these places, in every place where they had major elections last night. And it is because Donald Trump promised when he ran for president last year that prices would come down on day one of the second term. Well, prices have been rising, and Donald Trump and his Republican colleagues paid the price last night. Donald Trump wants to practice the politics of race baiting against Muslims and anybody who doesn't look like him. Americans want the president to fix the economy as he's promised, and he's failed abysmally, and that's why Republicans did so poorly last night.
All right. I want to bring
Hold on. New York City went for Kamala Harris by 81% in 2024. This was fertile ground for any Democrat. Mamdani actually underperformed Kamala Harris because he only got about 50% of the vote. Are you saying that that's somehow a referendum on President Trump? California, a blue state, rejected something that Trump wanted. That's not anything that reflects on Trump. Democrats don't like Trump. Republicans do. Thanks very much for that genius insight.
Brad, you want to respond to that very quickly?
Well, I would argue Mamdani's clearly a progressive. But if you look at the Democratic success last night in places that aren't liberal, in the gubernatorial races in Virginia and North Carolina, in the state Supreme Court races in Pennsylvania, and the Public Service Commission races in Georgia, the Democrats nominated moderate candidates who fit their constituencies. And that's what the party is all about. Progressives in New York City, moderates in New Jersey and Virginia and Pennsylvania and Georgia. And that's the Democratic secret to success, combined with Donald Trump's abysmal job ratings. It just wasn't the exit polls last night. If you look at any national survey that is done of the general public recently in the United States, Donald Trump's job rating is deeply underwater.
Okay.
His job approval rating is as deep, buried as deep in the sea as the Titanic.
Okay.
And it's going to take a lot to raise the Trump ship of state.
All right. Let me quickly, getting Tushar on this. Tushar, one of the interesting things that I've observed is that when the Prime Minister Modi goes to the United States, there's a huge support that we see from the Indian American community. But yet, in the case of Mamdani, and Mamdani's made many a controversial statement about PM Modi and about politics here in India, it's the same community that seems to have backed him very solidly, despite all the controversies we saw during the course of this entire campaign. How do you explain that paradox, Tushar?
Well, the Donald Trump administration has not really been coming out very warmly towards the Indian American community. The whole fiasco around the H-1Bs, the entire question around immigration, even the legal immigration, talking about taking jobs back from immigrants, legal immigrants that is, and the most important factor that is affordability. Look, the people you speak to in America, Indians living there, they're just complaining about one thing, that we also want to look at the affordability factor. Like a panelist before me spoke, that Donald Trump promised a relief from the entire inflation that was rampant during the Joe Biden administration. That has not happened. From going around town, pushing for more tariffs. But at the end of the day, the Americans are paying the price for those tariffs. It's not Donald Trump or his administration. It's the normal American, individual who's paying for those tariffs. And that is what this election reflects. While one way of looking at it is, look, Mamdani's victory is no surprise. New York has largely had a Democrat mayor for the last 100 years, 66 years, they had a Democratic mayor. That's all good. But the economic problems created from Trump's policies and Trump's geopolitical approach cannot be discarded either. And I think the Republicans would be going back to the drawing board tonight and be thinking that what lies ahead for them in the midterms. Because midterms is really when the first litmus test for the Donald Trump administration is. And how are they going to approach those midterms? That remains to be seen. If this entire question of affordability, racism, and questions against legal immigrants will continue.
Alex, you want to take that question? Because even someone like Vivek Ramaswamy, who's been so supportive of President Trump, has said that there are lessons that need to be learned from this election. Do you think there's a lot to be learned there?
there's a lot to be learned from everything. I think that people just learn the lessons more when it turns out that they're on the losing side. I think what Vivek Ramaswamy said was very accurate. We need to have an inclusive message that brings everyone in, and we need to focus even more on affordability than we have been before. Now, fortunately for that message, the Republican nominee, Jack Ciattarelli, who ran for governor in my state, New Jersey, did focus on affordability. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough to carry the day. What, as Republicans, I think we need to really be focused on from a strategic standpoint. Obviously, from a governing standpoint, we need to be focused on best securing the United States of America and making sure that people get the services that they need. What we need to be focused on from an intra-party strategic point of view is that there is a type of voter, a type of Republican voter who comes out to the polls when Donald Trump is on the ballot and only when Donald Trump is on the ballot.
Okay.
1.9 million people came out and voted for Trump in New Jersey. 1.3 million voted for Jack Ciattarelli, our Republican nominee. Why did we lose 600,000 voters? We need to find out who those 600,000 people are and activate them for future elections. That's one of the tasks of the Republican Party today.
Absolutely. Let me bring in Troy Blackwell, former advisor of the Biden-Harris administration. Troy Blackwell, the question that then arises...
Republicans would have lost even more big.
Yeah, let me just bring in Troy because he hasn't gotten a chance to speak yet. Troy,
are you saying anything? Do you have something to say?
Just a second, please.
If Donald Trump had been on the ballot last night, the Republican losses would have been a lot worse than they were last night. Donald Trump is a very unpopular president. You know, it's not really a battle between left and right. It's people it's between people who want to give tax cuts to bankers and billionaires and Democrats who want to help hardworking American families who are struggling with the high cost of living.
Okay. Let me bring in Troy.
The Democrats can reopen the government. That'd be nice.
Okay, let me bring in Troy now. Troy is, of course, a former advisor in the Biden-Harris administration. Troy, the question that many are asking is that, is there some amount of extra caution, strategic caution that the Democratic Party is taking, particularly in the case of Zohran Mamdani, and is that, somewhere going to cost public support and electoral momentum, because you have Trump openly coming out and saying, I wasn't in the fray, that is perhaps the shutdown that has, caused this election. What really is going on as far as the Democratic Party is concerned?
Yeah. From my view, I think the way I'm viewing it is that the party is a Big Ten party, and we're coming around to that, right? I don't think that this is necessarily about whether the party needs to be more liberal or we need to be more moderate. I think all elections, regardless of your party, it's about local politics. And you need to run candidates that speak to your jurisdiction. In New York City, Zoran Mamdani did well. New York City is obviously a very blue city. Democrats outnumber Republicans 6-1. He was able to run on a very progressive platform and do well. However, for New Jersey and Virginia, who had gubernatorial races, those candidates had to run a little bit more moderate because it spoke to the constituents and the electorate in that state. So to me, it's very much about running folks that speak to your individual electorate, and that's exactly what Democrats did, and we also saw that in a couple of other races. In Pennsylvania, we had referendum on judges. In Detroit, they elected their first woman mayor. So I think we've really got to see just kind of the full breadth of the Democratic Party. But in terms of the point about whether this is a referendum on Trump, I do believe that it is a referendum on Trump. I think whether it's someone like Zohran Mamdani, who ran as more progressive, or some of the candidates who ran as more moderate, the through line that we see in all of these candidates is that they ran on economic messages. This is a little bit different from where we were a year ago. Although Vice President Harris did run with an economic message, many folks that felt that it was not strong enough. In this case, all of the Democratic candidates that did well strictly focused on economics. They talked about affordability. They talked about affordable housing. They talked about support for small businesses. They considered transportation. And you also have to consider the fact that right now the election did take place while we are in the middle of a government shutdown. So there are millions of people that are not getting paid. There are people that they're not getting their food stamp benefits that are relying on that. We do know that there was emergency funding for SNAP that the president withheld. You had a number of AGs sue him, including my attorney general in New York State. to release those funds. So you have to factor all of that that's playing into right now.
All right. And I think that's a question for Alex, because Alex, he sees this as a referendum on President Trump's presidency. And also it's a fact that here's Mamdani, who identifies himself as a socialist. He identifies himself as an immigrant and a Muslim. So in that sense, as well as the fact that there's a significant Jewish population in New York, and many believe they also had a role to play as far as Mamdani's re-election is concerned. In that sense, a huge setback to Republicans.
Well, what Troy said is a couple of different things. He also said that every election is different, and every election fundamentally turns on local concerns, and I think he's right about that. Every election is different. Mamdani's win is a lot more about what's going on in the Democratic Party right now. How does the Democratic Party respond to Trump? Do they put up a moderate, or do they put up somebody who galvanizes the base like a Zoran Mamdani? That's what New York City was really about, because the Republican challenger who was on the ballot did not perform very strongly in the end. I think that we over-nationalize everything that happens, especially when we're talking about a larger view of things, that at the end of the day, the issues that move people to the polls are the issues that affect them very deeply. Affordability is one of those. But I can tell you, in canvassing in New Jersey and talking to people who are coming out to vote in the New Jersey governor's race, the shutdown was really not talked about all that much. I don't know if the shutdown played as big a role in this as we think, but we'll have to see what some of the exit polls say.
All right. And, one of the things that was very interesting, Tushar, is we saw Mamdani quote Nehru. Many would see that there are some people who are talking about that, and there's been criticism, there's been praise. There are many who look at it as from the perspective that it's the first Prime Minister of India who's been referred to, and therefore, in that sense, an important moment for all Indians. But also the fact that we're seeing more Indian origin leaders who are coming up in U.S. politics. At least 3 mayors of Indian origin, if we can call them that, who've been elected.
I agree with Alex here that we tend to over-nationalize a lot of elections, and we do have that problem in India as well, especially when it's about Delhi and Bombay's local elections. But then in India, people are over-internationalizing the victory of Mamdani. I don't know how Mamdani's win is a reflection of how politics will play out in India, but certainly someone in the Congress is quite happy that, Mamdani has won and he's quoted Nehru, so probably that reflects on how the country is feeling. But that is not how it works. If you can't over-nationalize Mamdani's win in America, you can't over-internationalize it in India. But here's the Indian American community, be it the Gujaratis, be it the Telugu community, be it the Sikh community, they have contributed a lot to the growth of America. They have been going there. They're working for decades, contributing a lot, building a lot of economic ecosystems. So the political evolution is no surprise. And that is where Trump's rhetoric against India and a lot of anti-Indian American rhetoric from the MAGA community, that was really, really surprising. And again, while the election may not have it may not be a testament to how Trump is performing, but the underlying issues, economic issues, I think that is something the Republicans cannot really ignore any longer.
All right. We'll have to leave it there. Tushar Gupta, Alex Zoran, Troy Blackwell, Brad Bannon, and to thank all of you for joining us this evening.